On a rainy morning, a young waitress quietly slips a plate of leftovers to a starving stray puppy, and the next thing she knows, she's fired and plunged into a dangerous game of threats, stolen dogs, and secret kennels. Can one simple act of kindness uncover a hidden cruelty ring and rally an entire community? A small act of kindness sparks hope. Every morning, at the busy diner, Harper, our kind-hearted waitress, moved among clinking dishes and cheerful chatter, her apron dusted with flour and her arms full of steaming coffee cups, trays of pancakes, and sizzling bacon, ready to greet each customer with a warm smile and a friendly word. But today, as she carried a tray of golden pancakes past the front window, something unusual caught her eye. A little golden retriever puppy, so small and fragile that he seemed more spirit than flesh, sitting alone by the curb as if he had nowhere else to be. His once fluffy fur was now caked in mud and filth, his ribs showed through his coat like the bars of a cage, and each breath sounded like a plea for help. His big pleading eyes followed every plate that passed inside the diner, but he didn't bark or whine for attention. Instead, he let out the softest sigh, a gentle sound that spoke of loneliness and hunger, a sound that felt like a quiet cry, echoing in Harper's heart. In that moment, the bustling diner, the shouts from the kitchen, the clatter of dishes, the low hum of voices faded into the background, and all Harper could see was this fragile creature, trembling in the cold morning air. She felt a sudden sharp ache in her chest, a deep compassion so strong, it nearly stopped her in her tracks. Her manager's rule echoed in her mind, no feeding strays, but her heart was louder than any rule. She knew she could risk everything for this little dog. Putting down her tray on a worn wooden table, she slipped behind the counter, her fingers trembling, as she grabbed a plate of leftover scrambled eggs, a few strips of bacon, and a piece of toast left untouched, but still crisp enough to break, plus a small cup of water, from the corner of the counter. She wrapped the plate in a clean napkin, and quietly slipped out the back door, hoping no one inside would notice or say anything. As she approached, the puppy lifted his head, his ears perking up in surprise, and he took a cautious step forward, his tail giving the tiniest wag of curiosity. Harper knelt carefully on the cool pavement, keeping her voice soft and soothing. "Here, sweet boy, it's okay, you can eat." She set the plate down gently, and the puppy sniffed at it, his nose wet and twitching, before diving in with a hunger so fierce it broke Harper's heart. She watched each bite, feeling tears form behind her eyes, and when he paused long enough for her to reach out, she stroked his head, feeling the grit of dirt swirl under her fingers. He leaned into her touch, as if to say thank you, and in that simple gesture, Harper felt an overwhelming warmth fill her soul, a feeling that what she did mattered more than any paycheck or rule. But before she could savor the moment, her manager stormed through the diner's front door, his face red with anger, and his arms crossed like a judge delivering a verdict. "Harper," he barked, his voice sharp enough to cut through the morning calm, "what do you think you're doing out here? Feeding that stray dog is against policy. You're fired. Collect your things and get out." The words hit her like a blow. The plate slipped from her hands, and the food scattered on the pavement, but she didn't move to stop it. Instead, she felt a fierce pride in her act of kindness, a conviction that helping another living being was worth the risk. Tears welled in her eyes, as she stood slowly, her apron stained with egg yolk, and her uniform wrinkled from worry, but she refused to let them fall. She turned back to the puppy, who looked up at her with soulful eyes, as if he understood the sacrifice she had made. Customers inside the diner pressed their faces to the windows, their whispering voices filling the air with surprise and sympathy. But Harper ignored them all. She dropped to her knees beside the puppy once more, brushing her hair from her face and whispering softly, "It's okay, you're not alone now." She wrapped her arm around him, feeling his small body lean against her side in gratitude and trust. And as they stayed there together on that cold sidewalk, she realized that this simple act of kindness, giving a scrap of food to a hungry pup, had sparked something much bigger: hope, compassion, and the promise that small gestures can change lives, not just for the one we help, but for ourselves too. Standing tall against cruelty. Later that afternoon, as Harper sat on the curb, holding the little golden retriever puppy in her lap and stroking his muddy fur, a sleek black SUV rolled to a stop at the end of the block, its polished paint gleaming in the late-day sun. The driver's door swung open, and a tall, kindly man in a crisp suit stepped onto the pavement, his eyes soft as he approached the pair, crouching slowly so as not to startle the puppy, and calling in a gentle voice, "Scout, come here, boy," at which the little dog lifted his head, ears twitching with recognition, then crept forward with cautious hope, pressing his nose into the man's outstretched hand and nuzzling him as if greeting a long-lost friend. The man's face lit up in relief and gratitude as he knelt beside Harper, explaining that Scout was his daughter's cherished companion, a source of comfort during the difficult months since his wife's passing, and that they had feared he was gone forever. He placed a warm hand on Harper's shoulder and handed her a simple white card bearing the name and address of the Evergreen Animal Rescue Foundation, asking that she visit tomorrow so they could properly thank her and perhaps discuss a greater purpose for her kind heart. Fired and feeling lost, Harper watched the man and Scout vanish into the SUV, its engine purring quietly as it drove away, leaving her clutching the card like a lifeline against the fear that her act of kindness had cost her everything, with no promise of anything new. The next morning, fear and hope tangled in her chest as Harper walked through the front doors of Evergreen Animal Rescue, where the bright lobby smelled of fresh straw and soft paws padded on linoleum, and was greeted by Andrew Dawson, the same gentleman from yesterday, whose face beamed with appreciation. He led her through rows of clean kennels and into an office lined with photographs of grateful families and rescued animals, now thriving, and told Harper how Scout had brought a smile back to his daughter's face for the first time in months, how her small gift of leftover food had saved his beloved dog and given a spark of healing to their broken home, and how from the moment he heard her story, he knew she was someone this foundation needed, someone with compassion and courage, and offered her a position on the spot, first as a part-time caretaker, then if it felt right to join the team full-time. Overnight, Harper's world shifted from the humiliation of being fired to the warm promise of a new family of volunteers, veterinarians and fellow animal lovers, whose dedication matched her own. Yet behind the scenes lurked a shadow. Mr. Grady, the gruff owner of the diner that had let her go, had long harbored a cruel habit of chasing strays from his property with brooms and water hoses, showing no mercy to any creature he deemed a nuisance. As Harper settled into her new role, Andrew quietly shared troubling rumors he'd heard, whispers of sick or injured puppies sold from a clandestine kennel connected to Grady, reports from concerned neighbors of howling dogs left to starve or tied in cramped crates, and stories of frightened cats flung out of back doors. Determined to stop this cruelty, Harper and Andrew set to work gathering proof. They borrowed a discreet video camera, staked out the alley behind the diner at dawn, and captured grainy footage of Grady shouting at a small, bedraggled cat as he chased it into the street. They collected faded pay stubs from a former employee who spoke of a hidden yard filled with makeshift pens, and they photographed flyers advertising healthy purebred pups at suspiciously low prices, which turned out to be stolen or abused strays. When Grady learned of their investigations, his anger was swift and threatening. Late-night phone calls with heavy breathing, ominous notes slipped under the shelter's door reading, "Stop digging or suffer the consequence," and even crude graffiti sprayed across the rescue's outer wall warning them to back off. But Harper refused to cower. Instead, she and Andrew took every safety measure they could, comforting trembling dogs through the night by sitting in their kennels with them, installing motion-activated cameras around the property, increasing volunteer patrols on nearby streets, and reporting each incident to the local police, who, though slow to act without hard evidence, documented their complaints diligently. With each act of intimidation, Harper's resolve only grew stronger. She spent long evenings, comforting frightened pups with gentle words and soft blankets, whispering assurances that they were safe now, that no one would harm them again, and that she would never turn away. Every time the police came to take another report, she stood tall beside Andrew, her voice calm and determined, explaining the pattern of cruelty they had witnessed, and handing over the latest videos, photos and witness statements. Though exhausted by the stress, she found strength in the wagging tails of the dogs she saved, and in the grateful smiles of volunteers who saw her courage. Through it all, Harper learned that standing up to cruelty meant more than just collecting evidence. It meant being a steadfast protector for those who could not protect themselves, refusing to let fear silence her voice or dim her compassion, and showing the world that even one person's simple act of kindness can ignite a chain of change that drives away darkness and brings hope to the most vulnerable. Rescue, renewal, and a brighter tomorrow Community Day began as the most joyful event the shelter had ever hosted. With colorful tents lining the front lawn, children's laughter mingling with the excited barking of puppies and adoptive families kneeling to stroke soft fur, volunteers beamed at each successful match, and even the shyest cats purred in newfound confidence. Yet beneath the cheerful bustle lay a dark undercurrent. Mr. Grady, furious that his intimidation had failed to drive them away, struck back by sneaking into the shelter late that night and stealing 2 gentle golden retrievers who had just found hopeful new homes. When Harper discovered the stolen crates, her heart pounded so fiercely she thought it might burst. Tears blurred her vision as she and Andrew scrambled to follow muddy tire tracks leading away from the gate, then clutched an anonymous tip, scribbled on a scrap of paper, an address deep in the woods, where the missing dogs were being held. Under a silver moon and a quilt of stars, Harper steeled herself for what lay ahead, her loyal foster dog Tucker at her side, his fur bristling in the crisp air as she opened the front gate to the rundown property. They crept through brambles and over fallen logs until they found the makeshift pen, 2 trembling retrievers pressed against a rickety fence, their eyes wide with relief and confusion at the sight of Harper. But before she could reach for the latch, shadow detached itself from the rotting porch. Mr. Grady, crowbar in hand, his face twisted in rage, and he advanced with heavy steps. Without a second thought, Tucker surged forward, his low growl warning Grady that this was no longer a one-sided fight. The sound of metal scraping on wood froze the moment, but as Grady raised the crowbar, a distant wail of sirens pierced the night. The police, tipped off by Andrew's urgent call, swept in with flashing lights that turned the shadows into jagged shapes. Startled and outnumbered, Grady snarled one last threat before dropping his weapon and fleeing into the trees, his silhouette swallowed by darkness. In the sudden quiet, Harper jerked open the pen's crooked latch and knelt beside the golden retrievers, wrapping them in soft blankets she had carried in her coat pocket, and whispering, "You're safe now, you're coming home," as they licked her cheeks with grateful tongues. Moments later, their true owner, a tearful woman, whose sobs of relief echoed through the clearing, fell to her knees beside her beloved dogs, hugging them tightly and thanking Harper with a voice choked by emotion. As the police led Harper back to her car, the woman pressed a small envelope into her hand. Inside, a note of thanks, and a promise to support the shelter in any way she could, from fundraising events to corporate sponsorships. The very next day, local media descended on Evergreen animal rescue, cameras rolling, as reporters captured Harper's calm determination and Tucker's proud stance. The story of the stolen dogs and their daring midnight rescue sparked an outpouring of community support. Volunteers signed up in droves, businesses donated food and blankets, and animal lovers shared the tale across social media, pledging funds and spreading the word. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Harper and Andrew locked the shelter door together, Tucker by their side, his gentle snore the only sound in the quiet parking lot. Holding Tucker close, Harper looked at the row of kennels and the happy faces inside, and felt a swell of pride and purpose, unlike anything she had known before. From the moment she'd fed that stray puppy on the diner curb, an act so small it almost seemed insignificant, to standing tall against threats and reclaiming the stolen dogs. Her journey had taught her that kindness, once sparked, can grow into a blaze that lights the darkest night. And as she turned the key and whispered good night to every sleeping animal, Harper knew without doubt that she had found her true calling, saving those who cannot save themselves, and giving voice to the voiceless, one gentle act at a time.